As 2010 began, unrest was already brewing in Kyrgyzstan. President Kurmanbek Bakiev had failed to deliver on the democratic promises he made when he took office 5 years earlier. Instead, he had packed parliament with his supporters and concentrated power in his own hands and those of his family. Political opponents and independent journalists who criticized Bakiev's government were beaten and jailed. During a winter of power outages and electricity rationing, the public was growing angry. But the cold weather had prevented widespread protests. With the beginning of spring, opposition protests began to gather momentum, especially after Bakiev's government drastically increased utility prices. But it was a misunderstanding that really set the protests rolling. On April 6th, police in the western city of Talas briefly detained opposition activist Balat Shirniyazov. He was soon released, but not before news of his detention spread, and his supporters gathered at the police station. Clashes erupted, and a crowd stormed the administrative building and seized the governor. Word spread to the capital Bishkek, where a much larger and deadlier protest erupted on April 7th. People threw stones at the security forces trying to break up the demonstration and guard the government building. Some members of the security forces fired on the crowd. The protesters seized weapons and returned fire. Several people, at least one of whom paid with his life, crashed vehicles into the gates of the government building, allowing the crowd to rush in and occupy the seat of power. By that night, 87 people had died in Talas and Bishkek. It was by far the worst violence the country had seen since independence. President Bakiev managed to slip out of the capital with his supporters and made his way to his home region in southern Kyrgyzstan. In the following days, opposition leaders in the capital named Rosa Atumbayeva as the head of an interim government. In the south, Bakiev spent a week trying to rally support in the cities of Jalalabad and Osh, while hanging on to his claim to power. But Russia, the United States, and OSCE chairman Kazakhstan all weighed in to say it was time for Bakiev to go. On April 15th, Bakiev signed a resignation letter and left Kyrgyzstan for good. He now resides in Belarus as a guest of President Alexander Lukashenko. Bakiev left behind many problems in Kyrgyzstan, and the April coup set the stage for the ethnic violence that erupted in June in the country's south. But his ouster also paved the way for democratic development. Less than 3 months after Bakiev fled Kyrgyzstan, a national referendum approved a parliamentary system of government, the first such government in Central Asia.